This is Oak Mike, and we're now in the second segment of our program today. Our first segment dealt with the infrastructure in St. Lucia, and now we are going to deal with the criminal situation in St. Lucia and all the aspects hinged to that part of it. I have with me Dr. King, a very well-known pathology officer on the island, and on my left I have Mr. Murray, who used to man the forensic lab and who has a wealth of experience. Both Dr. King and Dr. Murray have worked fairly closely over the years as a result of the nature of their work. I will first would like to ask Dr. King, how does he cope with what is going on? Based on the normal pathology work which he does, or he has to do for the country, the number of criminal activities which have taken place over the last few years, as an individual, to me, I just see this Dr. King continuously in the morgue, going through, skimming through, see what he can get. He must really be quite amazed at what he's seeing in St. Lucia today. Dr. King, just briefly, how do you cope with all of that, and how does it affect your life? How do you feel about what you see going on today?
Well, it's a question to answer on two ways, Mr. Chasney. As a professional, I am trained to deal with situations that like death and all around gathering evidence from bodies, determining causes of death and so on. So as a professional, it's interesting because I love my work, and so it's interesting for me. So that is not so difficult. Mm-hmm. I think the question that you're probably alluding to, which is the more pertinent one, I suspect, although we might come back to the professional aspect in a while, is as a citizen, as a human being. As a citizen of the country, over the years, I have seen the rates of homicide go up. The amount of people that are coming to the mortuary, into my hands because of death as a result of homicide, have really doubled since I first came to St. Lucia back in 1989. Now we are running homicide rates of average 40 a year. When I came back, Mr. Murray may remember, we used to get homicides of maybe 16, 17 per year. So definitely there's an increase in that, and I think that's disturbing, because why does a society have more homicide? What is going on in our country that our people are resorting to murder more than before? That, I think, is, for me, the really crucial question. There are questions as to what are we doing to better investigate homicide, and that might take us back into the professional arm. There are issues that I think we are not doing well enough at, whereas I think there are issues that we have really developed over the years, but I think that there is a lot of room for improvement in terms of what we do to investigate death.
Yeah. Louis, how long have you been in the forensic area in St. Lucia? Field, should I say?
It's a long time. It's about 30 years.
30 years.
I remember my first case was in 1984.
Where were you stationed at the time?
At the Victoria Hospital.
Oh,
we operated out from the laboratory.
Okay.
We had a sort of a small unit, and the service was based there until the new laboratory was opened in 2010.
Yeah. Now, as you talk about the new facility which opened in 2010, when I saw this forensic lab work, I was quite pleased to see it, although I know it's a very costly investment, and I don't think people actually realize the cost of that investment. Just for my own sake there, can you give me a rough idea what was the cost of that? First of all, to put up the building and the equipment, approximately?
From what I gathered, I probably wouldn't be able to give you an accurate or official figure, but I am getting somewhere in the region of about $8 million.
For what?
For the building and the equipment. So I know the equipment could be anywhere at about say 2 million.
Okay.
So it's maybe the building is about 6, 7, and the equipment, say about 8 to 9 million dollars would be a good figure.
Now, what year was that lab built and went into commission?
It started in 2005, I think, or 6, thereabout. It dragged a bit, quite a bit, and then it was completed in 2009. We opened in 2010.
And what contribution has that lab made to St. Lucia as far as the forensic results are concerned?
Well, off the bat, I can tell you, I could answer it this way. It is not making the contribution it should be making.
Why?
Because, well, we were very particular insofar as equipment. We had to choose on the services that we needed. And I think 7 services, or it had 7 mandates, 7 services were chosen, and we got the equipment to be able to operate these 7 services. The problem would have been staffing. And I think if you were to go back a bit, we will find that maybe not enough was done before the lab was opened to develop a staffing base, a good base, so people could enter the service and work in the lab. And that could have been one of the shortcomings, the preparation for the lab. But we had to open with what was available. And I would think that the lab opened with just about the minimum staff to get it going.
Okay, question for you. Has the lab contributed in any way towards the answers required? Because prior to that, you did work on the hospital, but you used to send work abroad, which I understand is very expensive.
Yes, certain amount of work went away, especially DNA. And that was one of the things about the lab. DNA wasn't planned in the lab, but we made some changes and we included a DNA service.
So you can do that?
Yeah. Yes, there is a DNA unit attached to the lab, and other critical areas. But it is not giving the service really it should be providing. And that, as I said, is basically due to staffing issues. You need to have a level of staff to be able to give you the results that you really want to.
Right now, in numbers, how many staff members are there at that lab?
Well, I am not at the lab now.
When you were there?
So I left in 2012.
Okay.
And in 2012, for instance, I operated 3 departments.
Okay.
And we had the DNA unit had a staffing of 2. And basically we had three persons on the bench,
okay,
with a director. And as a matter of fact, our director had to come in to operate on the bench, which is unusual because you don't get directors coming in on the bench. So the fact that happened meant that we were really short of staff. And really what should have happened was that should have been the minimum level. Staffing should not have dropped anywhere below that. And it dropped.
But question for you, with all the aid floating around today, don't you think it would be possible to get people from abroad for, say, a 6 months, 9 month period to come in to assist, Dr. Kane?
Well, I think Mr. Murray could answer in terms of the DNA. I do believe that we had a consultant in here who was helping with the setup of the establishment of the DNA.
Yes, she was in charge, but she set up the DNA. But to come to your point, you see, in the forensic work, especially when you have to do case work and you might be going to court, it's not easy to have people coming and going. You have people who wouldn't really go.
There's a level of continuity.
Yes, and then if they come, once they work on the case, they become part of it. If the case comes up in 3 or 4 years' time, you have to find out where these people are. And people won't really come and do that. You might get people who might want to do some training, but not to work. So you really have to stay with the people who you have.
Okay. But are St. Lucians eager to come and study that field and work with you, as far as you know?
Well, we have all the people at the lab when I was there are St. Lucians.
Okay.
And there might be some some St. Lucians overseas. So we really is a St. Lucia-based operation. But I'm not sure what people are hearing outside, and more people are interested in coming in. I'm not too sure what.
Question for you. in the OECS, how many such labs are there?
We don't know. St. Lucia is the only lab in the OECS which offers a forensic
Well,
service.
would it not have been feasible and more practical to get the other islands involved, whereas they could probably share the cost with us, we could do their work for them and get more equipment in that could be more decisive in the things that we want?
Yeah, because that comes back to what I was saying earlier on about the planning. I don't know what was planned when the lab was first thought of in the initial stages, but you'd have thought that it should have been an OECS initiative.
Okay.
But in the event that it wasn't, I think we should have been in a position to say, well, look, we have built our lab, it's in order, everything is more or less working properly, and so we are now open for business. And we should be getting, offering services. And in the past, I have indicated we have Dr. King. Dr. King does, if I'm correct, he does postmortems in some of the other OECS islands. So Dr. King could be a good source of business, so to speak.
A good conduit, yes.
Yes, for maybe
What is your thing, Steve? How you think that the government should pursue that avenue to get?
For sure. My problem with the way the government approaches the forensic lab is I think the policy is not thought out well enough. I think it should be approached far more on a business, from a business perspective. Because if you wanted to offer services to the OECS, even for the other governments that I do work for, as Mr. Murray pointed out, before I could recommend that they use our lab, I'd have to be assured that our lab could offer them the kind of service that would make it worth their while. In other words, the turnaround time would be appropriate, that the expertise to give evidence would be appropriate, that the very quality of the work would be appropriate. And I think that in all these areas, I think that we have good staff at the forensic lab, but I think that a lot of the policies are not in place to assure people who would access that service, including us very St. Lucians, because for me, I take samples and through the police, and we send them to the forensic lab. But I find that the lab is not turning around as it should. The lab is not delivering as effectively as it could or should. And I agree with Mr. Murray. I think there's a staffing issues, but I think it's more than anything. I think it's how has it prioritized the forensic lab services itself. How important are these forensic lab services to the government is a question I think the government needs to answer, because it would appear if the lab has now been in existence for 4 years, by now we should be at operating at a much higher level or a much more effective level than we are. I remember when the lab was being set up, just to add some light on what Mr. Murray was talking about, I remember when the lab was being commissioned, I think Dr. Nicholas Frederick was the Minister of Justice at the time, I think, and AG, I think. Right. And I remember him, and I thought it was a good decision. He insisted that we have the DNA available here. He actually, because there were people who were saying it was too expensive for us to do. He insisted we got it done, and I think that was a good, and we got it, and it happened. In addition, I think he wanted to, I heard him discussing at various meetings that we were going to offer this service to the OECS so that we could better support the operations of the forensic lab. And I don't think that policy was pursued. Yeah.
So your competition will be Barbados, right? When I say competition, Barbados has a full forensic lab, I'm sure.
Yes, but okay, but the countries that I work for in particular, mostly Anguilla and Montserrat, we will use Jamaica, the Jamaica labs, or we will use the British labs. Occasionally we'll even use labs in the United States. But the Jamaican labs have been, or the Jamaican lab has been doing a lot of the regional work. Barbados, from the Northern Caribbean, we tend not to use Barbados. I don't even know how much, I don't even think St. Lucia is using Barbados very much. I don't know, Mr. Murray, you might.
No, I don't think we.
Why exactly? Any particular reason?
Well,
I mean, prior to us going into the business.
Prior, we Barbados used to do our drug work. A lot of the drug testing was done. There was a consultant who did a lot of the work here. But we have not been using Barbados, and because in Trinidad we used to use Trinidad, but they have their own crime issues. They are overwhelmed with work, so we are not doing any. We can't go to them. But just to come back on the point Dr. King was even raising about being in order, and what that creates for our lab is a case of backlogs, because as soon as you can't do your work efficiently, you're now getting a backlog, and a backlog is like a devil's nightmare.
Wow.
Because the more you eat into a backlog, you have current cases coming in. So it's like something that you can never catch up.
So you get a fair amount of work as a result of what's going on in St. Lucia right now.
There would be, because you have cases, and then people become very sort of occupied with the ideas of murder, homicides, because this is something that catches the eye. But then don't forget, you have your cases of sexual assault. You have your which is a higher number than even murder. It's not a big case as a murder, but you have these that have to be done, and you have to do more or less the same kind of work that you'd be doing in a homicide, going through the evidence. You have sometimes nowadays you find situations where you don't only have one accused or one suspect. You might have 2 or 3 persons. That means the work is multiplied by three, because you have to look at each accused, the role they might have played. So it's a lot of work. I mean, you cannot get away from the fact that it is a tremendous amount of work.
And you know, one of my problems back to the postmortem point of view is toxicology. For a long time now, we've really required good toxicology services, and I must tell you, we have never been able to get the kind of toxicology on island that we truly should be offering to our citizens, and that I think is a mistake. I mean, when I was trained, we would do toxicology on virtually every case as almost like a screen. We do toxicology as indicated now and then. And very often the toxicology services, I don't think we can offer toxicology in the lab, Mr. Murray.
No, we have the equipment, but we don't have a toxicologist.
So it comes back to this problem. And you see, I think it is time. I understand these things cost money.
Yes.
And maybe this is what government looks at. What is the economics of it? It costs money to put these things in place. Okay, but let's do the analysis. What does it cost not to have these things in place? We talk about crime. What is the cost of crime to the country? What is the cost of not solving crime? Not being able to prosecute people properly?
Yeah. You have how many people on on remand?
Well, of the 639 or so inmates in Border, I think almost 353 of them are remand prisoners.
And you have 2 problems. You have the lab, the forensic side, and you have the legal side. Both need attention.
Very much so. Yeah. And even, well, I was going to say, and even I'm not satisfied either that, and the police and I are not satisfied, and we've had long conversations about this with our mortuary facilities as well. Our ability to do X-rays, our ability to store the bodies properly, our ability just to handle bodies in the manner in which we really should, from a crime scene all the way through to a post-mortem and then to a release back to the family. This whole process is not what it should be. We do as best we can, and it's okay, it stands in court, but the thing is, we could be doing so much better. And I think it is time that the government takes a good holistic look at the forensic services and puts a proper plan in place, like we have tried to do in the past, Mr. Murray. But I think it is time yet again to do it, because right now things are just being left, and none of us is really bringing it together and driving it as it should. And I think that's a mistake.
Because one of the things Dr. King mentioned about the mortuary, and people tend to think that a crime scene is, okay, an outdoor area where a body has been found. But the most important crime scene at a crime scene is the body. And one of the things that I have tried to do in the past, I don't know if it's happening now, is that because when you go to a crime scene, for whatever reason, sometimes you might not pay as much attention to the body as you should, for various reasons. Yes. Now, when that body is transported to the mortuary, assuming that you do so in a body bag, because that would be the condition, I think even before Dr. King starts his postmortems, crime scene people or from the laboratory, trace evidence examiners, should be giving that body a thorough go-over. That is before Dr. King starts, because you can still get a lot of trace evidence. But so we're now looking at the aspect of gearing our mortuary to actually have crime scene work being done there, being the body. And that is something that we need to look at.
As you raise that subject, I read the Star newspaper today, and I think it was written by Mr. Walker, Michael Walker, yeah. And he was questioning the way the last incident took place. For the sake of myself and the public, I'm going to ask a very simple question. Okay, we know that there was a murder, the car was burnt. It is felt by Mr. Walker that it was taken away too quickly. How long would it need, for instance, to cordon off the area to allow people like yourself or whoever it is that goes up there? Should it have been done? Is that the way it should be done? I don't know.
Let Mr. Murray answer that.
Well, yes, you need to. For instance, if you're looking at the car, now this is, if we step back a little bit to one of the shortcomings, I think, of our forensic lab, in the choice of location. Now, there's not much room for expansion or extension, and one of the things we don't have is a vehicle holding bay. And I think I saw a picture, and I know instances where cars straight from a homicide scene are brought to the police training school, left in the open for any forensic work, because the lab doesn't have the capacity. So that a thing like a car should be housed at the lab. You build a simple shed, right, at least to protect it from the elements, yes, so that it can be worked on. And this is one of the things where you find that would have been a shortcoming, because you never know when you have to go back to a vehicle.
Yes.
And you can't have it parked somewhere, maybe out in the open,
right,
or exposed, and then expect to go back in 2 or 3 days and say you're looking for trace evidence. So these are one of the things that need to be cleared up. But assuming, okay, the lab is at that location, then adjustments could be made. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could say, okay, vehicles will be moved to a specific area, not near the lab, and you build a proper secured area where they can be housed there and worked on. So there are ways of coming around it. But as we're realizing, or we're indicating, that there needs to be this relook, this comprehensive thing of saying, look, where are we from when we planned the lab? How successful have we been? What corrective measures we need to do? Because it's a learning process, and let's take it from there. We can't afford just to, if we realize there are problems, just let the problems ride. Now, they won't solve themselves.
What has just happened? The burnt-out vehicle. Where would it be now, for instance?
Well, it would be in the custody of the police, whatever location.
Okay.
But yes, I would assume that they would have it in it. But I can safely say, from the time I was at the forensic lab, and that hasn't changed, that they didn't have the capacity for a vehicle bay. See, not only in homicide, but you look at hit and runs.
Yes.
You need to look at the car for getting trace contact between the victim and the vehicle. Yeah. You need to have a lift and these sort of things.
And one of the things that occurs to me, that whether it can happen or not, I don't know. But you see the old Golden Hope?
Yes.
I actually was looking at building with a kind of eye of saying, why can't that building be converted into the mortuary, the scenes of crime place, and possibly also another court, because we need another criminal court. We need at least 2 criminal courts. Because it's on a police compound, or it's adjacent to a police compound, so the police compound could incorporate it. It's close to the forensic lab, and I believe it has a space to do some of what you've been alluding to create spaces where we could have a warehouse which could house fairly large items, boats, other vehicles, and so on. Surely, we could never really have enough space, but at least it will be better than what we have. Yeah. And that's what I mean about putting the forensic services on the priority list in terms of how we address the situation. Because I have not yet heard any public dialogue on doing something like that. And I think it is important, because we need to fix our mortuary, we need to fix our scenes of crime, how they store, how they operate, and we need to link it to our forensic lab, as well as we need to have more court space and time. So that is something that I think I would like to at least propose that we look at, since it's a building that we have available and we could use it.
Right.
The other thing is that that I think is important for crime scenes is the team approach. Now the police, I often respond with the police. The police, I mean, that particular event you're talking about, I was there with them that night. And I see the work that the police do. And I have a lot of regard and a lot of respect for the scenes of crime officers of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. I think they are often maligned, but actually there are some very good ones, and they do the very best with the resources that they have, and the support that they have. And I want to go on record as saying that. But I do think that what needs to happen is, and we used to do it a little bit better before, is to have the forensic scientists with us when we respond to the team.
Yeah.
Because you see, forensic pathologists, scenes of crime officer, forensic scientists, these three people, I think, are crucial on a scene. In fact, the forensic pathologist is the least important of the three, right? The two important people are the forensic scientist and the scenes of crime officer. I think, or at least those functions, I think, are so important on a crime scene. Because evidence deteriorates over time, and you want to gather evidence as quickly as it gets contaminated, it gets degraded. You want to get it as quickly as you can, and these are the people that can do it. And many times, crimes are solved by little bits of evidence collected at that time. So I think that's important. Now, and again, I think it speaks to the fact that we don't have our policies are not as clear as they should be. Our procedures are not as clear as they should be in how we are responding. Mind you, like I said, you'd be surprised at what the officers do and can do even now as we speak, because lots of evidence is collected. Even in that case, lots of evidence has been collected.
Fantastic.
So let us, I have every anticipation that there will be a resolution.
Okay. Well, this is our first segment with Dr. King and Mr. Murray. We'll be right back.